Alright everyone, there is a new TFT patch dropping as I upload this video today. Patch 11.17. It is not a I'm hesitant to say this is a big patch when it really isn't, but there's a good number of things changing, but that probably won't overly impact the meta. It's kind of my overall feel for this. There's a lot of moving parts, but not a lot of like big moving parts. First, some RP price changes. If you're in the league, you probably track this more than I do, but exchange rates for Brazil, Latin America, Russia, and Turkey are being increased. Actually, very interesting stories about regional pricing for video games is been going around for a past while because of some odd things going on. And I think Argentina. So, cool story to look up if you're bored, but out of my realm of what I was going to discuss here. System changes. So spatula drops. This is actually a pretty important one to me because I think it really impacts particularly the early game. Um, when you get a spatula, it often kind of feels like a low roll because you were expecting to get an item component and you didn't get an item component. And most people, when they get a spatula, they do not devote that spatula to anything until they like really know what comp they're going for. Um, Whereas an item component, you'll devote to an item and you can use that item pretty much anywhere. Spatulas become very specific. Either you sit on it to high roll a fawn, or you sit on to figure out what comp you're playing, so you know what throwaway component you have to throw on the spatula to maybe get some better traits lined up. So what's changing is spatulas will no longer count as an item component towards expected component drops and will only appear in bonus orbs. Long story short, what this means is that if you find a spatula in a PvE round, that will not count as an item component. If you take a spatula off a carousel, that counts as an item component. So if you take spats off a carousel, you're limiting yourselves on items. But if you find it in a bonus orb or in a PvE round, it's not counting towards your component total. Um, this is a decent change that will probably result in a lot more high rolls. I'm curious in the end how this is going to play out because like getting it also means that they have to value a spatula a certain amount of gold. Um, we'll see what that gold amount would be because I can't imagine that they would just throw it in bonus orbs willy nilly without any balancing. I'm assuming that if you find a spatula, it's now going to cost you gold when you find it in a PVE round. But we'll see how exactly this plays out. I'm kind of interested to see um, what happens because of this change. In the long term, I think it's a good change. But I'm reading this doesn't give a clear indicator on how it was accomplished, how they did it. So we'll see that over kind of the longer term of the game. Larger changes, some trait changes. So the big change here is Sentinel. Sentinel was functioning unintuitively. That's basically how I'll put it. Unintuitively, where people had basically figured out how to optimally position for Sentinel, and it really didn't often make a lot of sense to most players, especially if you're like gold and below, how to position to optimize the Sentinel buff. So they're changing how the Sentinel buff starts essentially. Um, where now the first Sentinel buff will always go to the champion with the most item, or specifically the Sentinel with the most items. If there's a tie, it goes to highest attack speed. What does this mean? This means your carry gets the buff first. That's what this means. Your carry now gets the Sentinel buff first. Um, it used to be you kind of had to position awkwardly in order to make this happen how you wanted it to. So now, since it's much more easier to optimize and much more intuitive, I might add, um, it gets a little bit of a nerf at 6. And a little bit of a nerf at 3 because there was weird degenerate things people were doing in the early game with it. But the shield value is getting a nerf at 3 and 6. The attack speed is getting a nerf at 6 and 9. I actually have never seen 9 Sentinel in my life, so I have no idea what that looks like. Um, Good change, just because, like I said, Sentinel is very unintuitive in how you position it. This means you don't have to really worry as much about the positioning, and you can play more optimally how you would normally play. I'll say, air quotes normally. Um, Sentinel's a weird trait. I'm gonna be honest. Of all the traits that Riot has dropped, Sentinel's one of the odder ones that I've played with. So I welcome this change. I do worry a little bit that this attack speed nerf might have been a bit too much. It might be right. I don't know, but it just feels like a pretty heavy nerf. The shield nerf at 3 was well deserved. it was kind of neat. I'm surprised it wasn't 150, to be honest. That's kind of how crazy it is. Sentinel. I mean, not Sentinel. Skirmisher. Skirmisher 6 kind of struggles. A lot of people pivot out of it if you're playing a very heavy Skirmisher comp. You'll pivot out of it and you'll play like maybe 4 Ironclad, or you'll play something super tanky. You'll basically just optimize your comp away from Skirmishers and more towards countering what your opponents are playing. So they're buffing Skirmisher damage at 6 and 9, but again, I've never seen Skirmisher 9 in my life. I'm fine with this. Skirmisher should be a high end comp. Skirmisher 6 should be a high end comp, but it's not seeing too much play, mostly because I personally think because Ironclad is ridiculous. But that's just where it landed. Spellweaver. So Spellweaver and Invoker have kind of been the premier spellcaster traits, but it's really only Invoker that's ever seen a lot of significant play. Spellweaver saw some play earlier in set 5 with, what was it, like Spellweaver Cavalier reroll. But that was more because Cavalier was crazy and Spellweaver had Brand, who was doing so much burn over time, and you could never kill the Cavaliers, and that's how that comp was winning. But in general, Spellweaver itself really lacks the oomph to be a very successful comp. So it's getting a bit of a rework here in that there's going to be no more AP cap. I believe it's an AP cap on Spellweaver stacks. So Spellweaver gets a stack, but it was capped. So there was a base power, and then Spellweaver get an ability power every. I can't remember whether it's time or whether it's every cast. It really tells you how little I play Spellweaver, or really anyone plays Spellweaver. But it kind of needed a rework or change to be something that's made more effective. But I'm not quite sure that this is going to be where it's most effective. I think the big thing to say about this is that this is a pretty big buff to Brand. Anytime Spellweaver gets touched, it really affects Brand the most because he casts the most and does the most damage over time. So any sort of Spellweaver buff really hits him I shouldn't say hits him, it buffs him pretty hard. So keep an eye on this, particularly when it comes to Brand. The next major change is tier 3 champions. In general, the 3-star 3 costs are kind of overwhelming the game and pulling away from a lot of the 4 costs. I'm not 100% sure I actually agree with that, but there are times when I say, yeah, that's very true. Generally, it's when people are just re-rolling and hit their. I think my issue with it is that it's actually not very often I hit my 3-star 3 cost. I usually end up at 2-star and sitting on a couple, 3 or 4 of them, and just usually die before I can finish. Sitting at level 7 and sitting at level 8 can get pretty painful when you're not actually running like real carries. But I digress. In general, the 3-star variants of all of these units, Lee Sin, Nidalee, I'll skip Rakan because we'll talk about Rakan a little bit later, especially Riven. Riven right now is really crazy with the Legionnaire change. And Yasuo, they're all really good 3-stars. I'm surprised Lee Sin at 3-star has lasted as long as he has. He's an incredibly good champion that does so much work for any comp you put him in. Meanwhile, Nidalee's dodge chance has kind of been bonkers for a long time. Makes her one of the most difficult champions to kill throughout the mid game. Rakan, Rakan's an interesting champion because he's kind of a full-on utility champion. And usually the utility champions that most compositions play are CC. Well, he's not CC. He's just like pure heal bot. Well, really shield bot, to be honest. But he's actually like quite effective, despite the fact he doesn't see too much play outside of Sentinel comps. Um, which is fair to say because his traits don't really align to anything but Sentinels, in my opinion. Um, but his ability is incredibly strong, especially at 3-star, and he's usually not contested, so he's pretty easy to get it to 3-star. So a lot of these changes, these 3-star changes here, I can understand, but if you've never seen it, I'm not surprised. Riven, yeah, Riven's getting hit pretty hard here. Riven 3 with the Legionnaire change is too much. It honestly is too much. And I think Riot actually had an understanding of that when they actually made the Legionnaire change, which is why Riven actually got a nerf when they made the Legionnaire change. But it's been so powerful that it just needed another touch. The big change here, most of these changes really actually aren't that significant. The 5 AD nerf's a bit hard. The 50 HP is tough. But the big change is the damage on the spell. The damage on the spell was way too high and is actually just kind of getting crushed. So most of the damage from Riven now should actually be coming from the auto attack damage and not from the spell, thankfully. Yasuo. So the Yasuo change is actually really slight in my opinion. I don't think it'll impact him too much, which means it probably hits the head on the hammer right here. Yasuo already was kind of slightly falling off a little bit, but he's getting a slight attack speed nerf. The spell at 3-star is getting a slight nerf, and the true bonus damage is getting a tiny nerf here. The thing with Yasuo was when you combine him with Archangels, a lot of these values start to get out of control way too quickly, which is why they needed to kind of hit everything slightly. Overall, oh, and some of the one-star variants I think got hit as well. I just don't know which ones. Let me go back through these again. Oh yeah, Nidalee. Yeah, Nidalee and Lee Sin were the biggest offenders there. Yasuo really wasn't a big offender there, but Nidalee, because of the evasion, combined with the bonus attack speed, was really rough. And Lee Sin I told you, Lee Sin does so much work and is considered a skirmisher, so you can use him pretty easily in the early game to turn on 3 skirmisher, 3 sentinel, to kind of like just free win through the early game. So, like I said, tier 3 champions got, particularly tier 3 carries, got hit pretty hard this patch. So that'll weaken reroll quite a bit, but not if you don't hit. Like if you can get up to it, it's what's really been hit here is the early game with Lee Sin and the early game with Nidalee, along with your end game 3-star carries. All of them were pretty much hit very lightly, with the exception of Riven, which got hit all over the place. So theoretically, these comps should still be playable, but you probably shouldn't just be free rolling for them every single game. The standard play for TFT, as it's been for basically a couple years now, well, I shouldn't say a couple of years, basically a year and a half now, has been get to level 8, find your 4 cost, and settle down with a 4 cost carry. That's kind of the standard way of playing. Reroll should be playable, but it was kind of taking up too much of the meta in mine, and I assume Riot's opinion. 4 cost, Draven. Draven's supposed to be a carry. He's not carrying enough, so he gets a buff. Honestly, I think I've said it before, and I'll say it again with Draven. Draven's awkwardness is tied to his traits, not so much really anything else about him. Because he's, well, actually, I take that back. It's tied to a combination of his traits and the fact that he works front to back. So he has to go through every frontline unit before he ever starts touching backline units. Those two particular things combined, so the front to back nature of his attacks and his awkward traits. When I say awkward traits, I mean basically if you play Draven, you're playing for Forgotten. So it means you had to have been playing Forgotten throughout most of the game in order to get 4 Forgotten online. Those combined to be kind of awkward to play. Draven's kind of my emergency conversion. for composition. So when I'm playing something that gets highly contested or I can't find, it's not uncommon for me to just transition to playing Draven. Because often in the game, I've been carrying Thresh and Nautilus to kind of hold down my mid game to go either Knights or Cavalier. Tier 5 champions. Okay, bunch of changes here. To start with Gwen. Gwen is kind of supposed to be a carry and kind of isn't a carry. So Riot's kind of doing a lot to buff the damage. I know these numbers actually seem very low, but because of how often Gwen casts and because she's applying armor and MR shred, these stack up quite quickly. So do not be surprised if you see a bunch of Gwen carries flying around and being very confused as to why this is a thing now. It's because, particularly at 2-star, this number will escalate quickly on her. Heimer. People have complained about Heimer for too long, so they're nerfing Heimer. Pretty simple stuff here. I actually really like the attack speed nerf. I think that was the optimal way to go. The mana nerf... The problem with the mana nerf is that Heimerdinger's best item is Archangels. This essentially kind of buffs him when he has Archangels. So it's kind of tough to tell how much of a nerf this really is. But I will say I love the attack speed nerf. I think that was probably the proper way to go on him. It effectively increases his max mana without actually increasing his max mana. Kale. What do I have to say about it? I don't think this was right. I'm gonna be outright here. I don't think this one was right. Now, on one hand, Kale is supposed to be a 5-cost premier carry. Kale is supposed to obliterate things, which she hasn't done in like 4 patches now, since they absolutely destroyed her health pool. Now that they've reworked her, they're giving her back her health pool. As I said, I'm not quite sure this was the way I wanted to see Kale go. I'm not saying that Kale shouldn't be a carry. It's just that Kale has kind of been one of the more frustrating carries in set 5 in general, in terms of her effectiveness. Where as long as she's going to eventually get to that point where she just splatters the entire battlefield with swords. And you just put your hands up in the air and it's like, well, didn't get on Kale fast enough. I guess I just lose. I mean, we'll wait and see how this goes. This health pool changes. Just so much health to add to her to give her survivability. Especially with items like Hodge being as good as they are right now. We'll see. Viego. Finally, Viego's frustration is getting toned down. So this is actually a pretty complicated read here, but in general, what it means is that Viego's actual spell, particularly at 1-star, does way less damage, like a lot less damage. So in general, Viego's not actually, until you get to like Viego 2, he's not really going to be converting a lot of units anymore. Instead, it's going to be CCing some unit for 5 to 6 seconds, or however long Viego's spell takes. He's going to become more like CC your backline carry, move on with your day. I'm fine with this. I think I've said this before with Viego. I'm not happy that he both does damage, or I shouldn't say both. He does damage, he converts, and he does CC. You need to pick like one of these things for him to do. He should not be doing all of these things at once. So they decided that he's going to do some damage, which leads to less converting, but still be a CC bot, which I'm honestly fine with. It's kind of the change I was looking for here. Item changes. Giant Slayer. So this is an interesting change here. My understanding is that this was actually supposed to be applied much earlier, but for one reason or another, it got implemented and then reverted for some reason. I'm not quite sure why, but the key point here is that the Giant Slayer scaling damage is plus 20% now. That's just the base scaling on it now. That's a lot more damage. That's a lot more damage. Making Giant Slayer should feel fine. Also worth noting that I think this actual change to the threshold, there's a lot more champions that this will work on now, and I think there's a bunch of champions that like just did not get hit with Giant Slayer correctly, and I think this change should actually fix that all that on quite a few champions. Smaller changes, a bunch of slight A-bomb changes. I don't think there's too much to write home about. They're trying balancing A-bomb has clearly been quite difficult for Riot. Trying to figure out like I think at this point, once you hit A-bomb 4, you don't push A-bomb, or you hit A-bomb 3, you get to A-bomb 4, and then you're gonna go back down to A-bomb 3 to play something else. So in general, A-bomb 4 is generally considered pretty weak. So they're trying to like increase the power level of late game A-bomb without making it like too overbearing, especially when you get to level 5 A-bomb. I believe it's level 5 A-bomb. It's A-bomb. Legionnaire, they're buffing 4 and 6 Legionnaire. I've seen 6 Legionnaire get some like fringe play. I don't think there's like a lot of actual synergy going on with that composition. But it is a little surprising that we haven't seen more 4 Legionnaire, especially if you find like a spatula. I would think if you find a spatula, 4 Legionnaire is something that's pretty easy and kind of effective. But yeah, what do I know? I'm just some random plat chat nerd. Tier 1 changes, Vayne AD's going up. This one's only a tiny bit worried. So here's my thing on this one. A lot of people I think saw this and were kind of freaking out because Vayne reroll carry had kind of started becoming a thing recently. It's not a great thing, but it is a thing. This is just an AD buff. This is meant to keep Vayne as an early game carry to hold your items. And it probably will not really affect that reroll comp like at all. Ziggs, slight buff to 3-star. Not much to talk about there. Kennen, Kennen's attack speed is going down, which is fair considering that it's very hard to kill Kennen before he ults unless he has 1-star. If he's 1-star Kennen, he almost always dies before he ults. If he's 2-star Kennen, he never dies before he ults. Pyke attack speed buff. Didn't know that was happening. Okay. Set is getting a buff. Set gets so little play. Brawler is not a very good front line in general. Soraka is getting an attack speed buff. I don't really know why. I'm assuming it's because Dawnbringer is not getting play. And if Dawnbringer was getting more play, we'd see more Soraka. Tier 3 champions, Ashe, health boost. Not much to talk about there. Lux attack speed buff. That's kind of an interesting one because Redeemed has been seeing a lot more play. But I think it's probably pretty safe because they got Lux down and Redeemed comp down to a point I think everyone can be satisfied. We're not going to be seeing the infinite shield buffs that Lux was giving beforehand. Misfortune, she's getting hit with that 3-star nerf from above. I'm surprised this actually was not packed into that. In general, I was of the opinion you don't run this comp without a Jewel Gauntlet and Sojins, especially a Jewel Gauntlet. I don't think this really changes that. I think it's probably still okay to run, but only if you have a Jewel Gauntlet. If you don't have a Jewel Gauntlet, I don't think you can run the Misfortune reroll comps anymore. Nocturne, I've said it before, I'll say it again. Nocturne 1 is garbage. Nocturne 2 is barely better than garbage. It's really difficult to play Assassin until you get Nocturne online at 3-star. So they've kind of rebalanced his power level here to buff the 1-star and 2-star while nerfing the 3-star, which is fine because when you get Nocturne to 3-star and you get to that late game comp, you have a lot of damage in your composition that you can throw at people. It doesn't all need to be coming from Nocturne, but you itemize them anyway because that's how it works. Fiddlesticks, If you've ever seen a Spellweaver Fiddlesticks or an Assassin Fiddlesticks, you would know that Fiddlesticks does way more damage than a lot of people realize. So they're toning down the damage a bit, which is fine. Okay, now for this one. Karma. Karma is getting a 5 damage buff on the spell at 1 star and 10 damage buff at 2 star. I probably would have personally gone a little further. I think this probably could have become 40, and this probably could have become 300, just at what the current point in the game is. But it also makes sense that like little tweaks onto Karma's damage result in like pretty significant increases in her damage output based on how her spell works, being a randomly targeting multi-firework spell that hits AoE. So it's understandable that they went really light on this, but I would not be surprised if we see Karma get buffed again, because eventually Karma needs to become a carry to make spellcaster builds like functional again. Vel'Koz has been seeing a lot more play lately. I honestly don't even know why, because he's not even getting it's play like outside the redeem comp. So I haven't really understood how the Vel'Koz builds really work right now, but they've been pretty popular. So seeing a mana nerf on him is not that surprising to me. All right, general tier 5 champions. Ashkan's getting an attack speed nerf that no one's going to realize. Yeah, you're not going to notice this change. Garen's actually getting some really nice changes here. The big one being this Victorious trait health bonus, or missing health damage. That's a pretty big buff to him, actually. I actually really like this change. Teemo, slight nerf to 1-star Teemo, which I don't overly like, but fine. It's probably more to balance out Hellion with that change more than actually nerfing Teemo. The bigger part is making Cruel actually function correctly. It's pretty clear that Cruel has been something that just like awkwardly functions. So it's nice to see that kind of getting better functionality. And as Mort Dogs for this one's actually gotten a lot of talk. So this was a community-led nerf on Mort Dog's Twitch channel. So I understand why people are kind of angry about this, because this was just like the community saying that we hate this champion, please nerf, and then Riot and Mort Dog actually going through with it. On the other hand, it's freaking Volibear. Volibear always casts. I've almost never seen a Volibear not cast, which is because his health pool is freaking gigantic. So to see Volibear get nerfed, I mean, this was probably on their plate in the first place, even when Mort Dog went with this community and tried to nerf. So like the nerf ended up aligning with our data. Like I don't think this part really mattered. This was always going to happen. Oh, that's right. The nerf was actually supposed to be like they were going to get rid of 1 health. It was going to be something silly and stupid and like not competitive based, but in general, like the nerf just aligned with the goals of the game. So I'm not going to complain too much about any of this. I think there's plenty of people who can go pull out their pitchforks and scream about it, but I mean, this was just inevitable and needed anyway, so I'm not gonna worry too much about it. Item changes. Interestingly, they're buffing Stoneplate. So I think the issue with Stoneplate isn't that it's a bad item; it's just that everything else is better. So this is Radiant Stoneplate, if you haven't noticed. This health regen is actually a lot. Like you put this item on a super tanky champion, like they never die ever. But like these high-end defensive items in general, the other items have just kind of been better. There's not much else to really say here. I don't really think this was necessary outside of the fact that people weren't making it, which in turn like could make it necessary. But I think in terms of actual power level of an item, this item was fine. Stoneplate, little extra buff here. That's fine. Like stone plate's like that defensive item I didn't want to make, but all I had components for. And Gunblade max shield is going from 300 to 400. I'm surprised this didn't go up top in the major changes because this is actually a pretty big buff to the item, especially on early like karmas. Because karma can generate all this healing like in the snap of a finger. So it's kind of surprising to see this down low. This is a good change, especially for karma. Kinda for Vel'Koz, kinda for Teemo, not so much for Heimerdinger. So UI, so they've moved our match history. Okay. Bug fixes. Show the correct stun. Fixed eggs. Oh, they fixed the charity. So this was actually an issue with Chalice of Charity not providing the correct spell vamp on AoE abilities, so they fixed that. Fix Aatrox self heal on his ult there. Weird things with Frozen Heart that I'm going to ignore, and Lucian's ability not properly interrupted by Lulu's polymorph. I didn't even know this could happen. Well, you know. Anyway, that's it for these patch notes. I'm not expecting a lot of change in the meta, just kind of some like end game things that we used to see, we might not see as much of. In general, your 3-cost champions probably aren't going to be as effective, while your 4-costs and 5-costs are going to be more effective. But I mean, that's nothing new. It's kind of how the games worked over time. Anyway, that's it. I'd say something else about this patch, but it's kind of a patch that not a lot of stuff is changing, but the meta itself will probably not overall change. The only thing that's really changing here is probably how you play the end game with Gwen, Kale, and whether or not you actually want to roll for a 3-cost carry. That's it, guys. Hope you enjoyed. I'll see y'all around. Peace.